Oh, hi there, Jackson.
Good morning, everybody. Jay here with Midstate. Thanks for checking in. We had a slight change in plans for today. We were originally going to be hauling rock all day today with the tandem and the excavator. Ended up having a problem with the tandem, had a transmission issue through a code, and basically went into range inhibit to where we couldn't really change any gears on it. So unfortunately, that truck had to go up to the international dealership to get looked at. So it's about 10:30 right now, and we're actually going to change gears and do a small clearing job, mulching job that we had scheduled for next week. Got a hold of the owner and asked if we'd come up and do that today. So So here is the Vail Mulcher. This is a rotary style, so for any of you guys who are familiar with mulching attachments for skid loaders, there's two different types. There's a drum mulcher, which is like your FAE and your Dennis CMOFs. Those are probably the more popular ones. Then there's a rotary type, and these rotary type are really good for smaller machines, machines that don't have quite the hydraulic flow as some of those bigger ones do. And I will tell you though, this attachment is absolutely amazing. It does such a good job. It's pretty small. It only weighs, I think it weighs maybe 2,000 pounds, so it's real easy to move around uneven terrain. Just does a really good job mulching. Fits perfect with the Cat 259. It handles it just fine. I've got a high flow machine. It runs at like 33 gallons a minute, something like that, at 3,300 psi, something. So that's this attachment is well within the specs of that machine. It's just a really nice mulcher for what we do. Most of the mulching that we do is a lot of invasive species, so your Russian olive, your honeysuckle, stuff like that, it just absolutely eats them up. It'll do really well in material up to about 4 or 5 inches in diameter. You can go a little bit bigger. It just takes some more time, and then anything that's too much bigger than that, you know, like your 6, 7, 8-inch stuff, you just got to take your time. If you try to go too fast, it just feels like you're destroying the machine in the mulcher. So we're going to do a little bit more on this. Once we start mulching, I'll talk through it, but this is what we're going to take with us right now. I forgot we needed to drop off the salt spreader pretty close to where we were going to be working, so I figured we might as well kill 2 birds with 1 stone, get this thing delivered, and get our mulching job done all on the same trip. Unloaded, so now we are headed to the property where we're going to be doing the mulching. So we have arrived. We are mulching. There's a tree line back there. I don't know if you guys can see it. That's where we're going to end up going. We're going to cross this field right here. It's corn stubble, and we'll go ahead and unload right here on this nice little grassy path because, well, we don't want to get this nice clean truck all up in that corn stubble. So we'll get unloaded here. So the hydraulic hookups on this mulcher are pretty standard. You've got a case drain, you've got a pressure, a return line for the hydraulic motor on the mulcher, and then you also have this high flow harness right here. And what this is just basically just a harness, plugs in, and it's a pin jumper. So how Caterpillar's HydroFlow hydraulics are activated, when you plug that in and turn on the hydraulics, there's a switch there that recognizes that there's basically a jumper wire connects two of the pins on inside of here and activates the high flow. So if I take this off, try to run the hydraulics, it's only going to be in low flow. I don't know if you can see right there. There's two ends on that connector that connect that wire. So pretty simple for the most part. We'll get it hooked up and we'll take off. So before we get started mulching, I'll just do a quick overview of this Vail forestry mulcher. So as I said, this is a rotary type. There is another type. There's a drum mulcher. This one is essentially like a bush hog on steroids. As you can see, all the components and parts underneath this thing are super heavy duty. Blade carrier, I think, is like 1 inch thick metal. It's got these big chipping knives. You can come down on top of a tree and it'll kind of just knife it on the way down. It does a fairly good job. Really, sometimes I find myself actually using these blades themselves, these main blades, to do that. It seems like it's just as quick, and it does a really nice job processing the material. So very, very heavy duty unit. Push bar in the front, super aggressive, super heavy built. Just an overall good machine. It pairs really, really nice with this Cat 259 with the high flow. Like I said earlier, it's got the hydraulic flow for it. It's got the lift capacity to handle it really nicely on all sorts of terrain. It's just a good setup here. Am I as productive as a Cat 299 or ASV, you know, or PT 110, something like that with a drum mulcher? No. Especially when it comes to bigger material, I'm definitely a lot slower. However, a lot of the smaller stuff here, a lot of this underbrush, honeysuckle, Russian olive, I can be a lot faster, and I'm a lot nimbler, being that this is a much smaller machine. I can cruise around these smaller, tight areas a lot quicker. So just depends on the application. It works out really well for what we do. I like it. You guys can see with the amount of weight underneath here, this thing definitely has some inertia, and that's one of the biggest principles when it comes to mulching, is that you want a lot of inertia, because that's what gives you the chopping power when it comes to the bigger material. So this whole setup right here, this is a slower moving mulcher than some others. I don't know how many RPMs these blades run at when it's flowing on our skid steer, but this one runs a little bit slower, has a really good recovery time, and so that was the trade-off. It recovers really well, so if you go and hit a big piece of material and it slows that blade carrier, or it slows those blades down, they speed back up a lot quicker than it would. So here we are inside this section of woods mulching, and as you can see, pretty uneven terrain, and there's a lot of down trees. There was a bunch of ash trees that had died and fallen over since the last time that we were there, so it made the maneuvering around in this area a little more challenging. The area was not super open to begin with, but when you put all the trees on the ground and bigger trees at that, it just makes it a lot harder to go around. But you can see we're just driving around trying to grind up as much underbrush, honeysuckle as we can. We got to make sure we don't get into any of those bigger logs on purpose, because that's pretty hard on the equipment. But here we are moving around, just trying to hit as many different areas with as many different angles as we can, and we'll basically just kind of keep driving around. It seems like we're driving through aimlessly, but we're just going around trying to hit all sorts of different directions, try to get as much mulched up as we can. We're coming up on a couple of larger honeysuckle bushes, and what I'm going to do is raise the mulcher up in the air and tilt it back to where the bottom of the mulcher is pointing towards the ground. What I want to make sure is that I don't point the bottom of that mulcher towards the cab at all, or that cab door. It'll have a potential of slinging material back into the cab door, which obviously is dangerous if you get into any sort of larger chunks of vegetation and or a fence post or something like that. So you want to be very careful and make sure you always point that not towards the cab door. You'll notice that I'm coming up and starting from the top and working my way down. That's the quickest way to process that material. You can keep that mulcher, on the ground, come in and cut the base, and then come in from the top. I'd find it's just a little quicker and a little more efficient if you just process that vegetation as it's still standing. So that's just what I found. Honeysuckle's pretty brittle. It'll shatter pretty easily. So once that mulcher starts hitting that honeysuckle brush, it'll grind it up pretty quick. It does a good job. So here we are about to wrap up. You can see how much more open this area is than when we first got started. There were still quite a bit of trees, dead trees that were laying on the ground. You can see all over the place. Right here is a couple big chunks of a tree that were on the ground. It just makes it a little bit more difficult to navigate the area. Obviously, it's an obstacle to go over, and it's something you need to make sure you avoid with that mulcher. But overall, it turned out really nice. Opened it up quite a bit for the guys to be able to hunt and see the deer a lot better. So it turned out really great. And before we take off, we're going to go ahead and get the mulcher cleaned off. Obviously, we don't want to be unloading all of these leaves and sticks and debris down the interstate as we're driving home. So we make sure we get in and clean as much off as we possibly can. And we'll do the same thing with the skid loader. Make sure there's no sticks or anything on the back. But all loaded up, ready to head home.